My name is Gavin Evans, and this is my review of The World's End. And this review will have spoilers, so there's your warning. But when people talk about Edgar Wright's filmography, this movie is usually at the bottom of their list. Like, people enjoy it, but they don't seem to love it. And that, to me, is pure insanity. Like, what? How could you not love this movie? Like, this movie is perfect. It's a masterpiece. It's Edgar Wright's best movie, and quite frankly, it's one of the greatest movies ever made. This movie is that good, and it only gets better with time. So let's begin by talking about the performances. And Simon Pegg gives the performance of his career. He is funny, he's filled with personality and energy. So he carries this movie perfectly, but he's also a very frustrating character, yet you understand the appeal behind him. And there's real emotional depth as well, and I was surprised at how tragic of a character this was, and Simon Pegg just highlights that to perfection. If it were up to me, Simon Pegg would have won an Oscar for his performance here. He is truly remarkable. And then we got Nick Frost, who kind of plays against type here, but he excels at it. He is very funny, he is very likable, and I like how at first you think his life is just all grand and dandy, but it turns out there's more going on than we initially think, and he brought that to the surface incredibly well. Rosamund Pike does a really good job. She's actually quite charming and likable here, and I thought she was funny when needed. Then we've got Martin Freeman, who like, he's good in the first half of this movie, but when he gets taken over by a blank and he's so optimistic and positive, he is truly hilarious. Paddy Constine, I like how he's just a genuine good guy. And I actually thought he really stood out. Eddie Marsan, I thought was really funny. That scene where he's laughing about King Gay is so good, and I was impressed with what he brought to this movie. And Bill Nye is barely in this movie. He just voices the leader of the Blanks, but you can feel his frustration. You can feel his annoyance. So he does stand out despite his minimal screen time. David Bradley, I think, is a very funny and amusing side character. Michael Smiley makes the most of his minimal screen time as well, and he still manages to stand out. Pierce Bronson is a delightful presence here. So everybody does a great job. Even the supporting characters still stand out. But I also need to mention that the leads of this movie showcase some of the best drunk acting I have ever seen. I don't know how they did it, but they just struck that perfect balance, and I was really impressed. But the movie's also incredibly well directed by Edgar Wright. Like, this guy's style is so unique and so interesting, and the editing just adds so much personality. I also like how the sound is used for comedic effect, especially whenever there's a beer getting poured, beer, 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 water. Like, The sound makes that joke funny. And I think the movie is incredibly well shot. The CGI looks really good. And you know what the crazy part is? The budget to this movie is, no joke, 20 million. How? How? Blown away. I also really like the score by Stephen Price. I like the techno sound at times and how it adds to the urgency. The soundtrack is so good. The use of Loaded at the beginning feels iconic to me, but I also loved the use of the whiskey song. So good. And speaking of so good, So Young is really well utilized into the movie. And I love how this movie cuts to credits and happy hour plays. Just one of my favorite cut to credits ever. So the direction is just top notch. I think the action is very well choreographed and put together. And I love how smart the script is. There's so much attention to detail, and I just love how the pub's names have meaning behind them. And I also love how this movie tells you everything that's going to happen within the first 5 minutes. And it's just so smartly done. Like, this script is brilliant. Almost every line of dialogue comes back into play. Every moment has purpose. And it's just a masterclass. Like, this script is one of the greatest scripts ever. And I also love the world building. The blue lights, the blue ink, just everything regarding the blanks and even how they can put themselves back together. There's lots of creativity on display, and the movie is hilarious. I laugh from beginning to end, and just some of my favorite jokes are how they're trying to come up with names for the warbots. I love the one scene where Pierce Brosnan asks, "Does anyone know what warbot means?" And Gary puts up his hand. "I do, actually. It means slave." I love the scene when he's like, "If I could describe it in 3 words, it would be really, really sad." Actually, no, that's 2 words. How about really, very sad? um, it's also just funny how shitty of a character Gary is. And I also love how when Rosamund Pike is asking Andy what's going on, he's just pretty much like, "Well, they know that we know that blah 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 blah, and no one has a better idea, so fuck it." And he walks into a door. Uh, you know, I'm sure there's people who complain about the fact that they could have left this town at any point, and it could have felt contrived, but this movie also strikes that perfect balance where there's some logic, but also it's mainly played for laughs. And I also love how unlikable the main character is. He is a selfish prick. And there are some cringy moments. Like when he follows Sam into the bathroom, it's so tough to watch. And how he has the same car, he has the same tape, he has the same map of the town. Like, it's just so pathetic that you can't help but cringe. But that said, this movie is heartbreaking. Like, the entire final act, well, Gary is trying to finish the Golden Mile, and Andy is trying to stop him. I know this is going to sound weird. I bawl my eyes out during this scene because it is just one guy on a mission of self destruction. a guy enslaved to his addiction, and his best friend going after him, trying to save him. It's actually really beautiful and touching and devastating. And the fight at the world's end, well, Andy moves Gary's sleeve and he sees what Gary's done to himself. Like, he's such a funny, upbeat character, and then you just realize, no, he is a deeply broken and tragic character. And it's just tough to watch. And, you know, I think there's something in this movie that lots of people can relate to. You know, that period in time that you didn't realize how good you had it. There was this one company I worked for a few years, and it definitely had its terrible moments. It was not all fun and games, but there was a good group of friends we had there, and sometimes you just don't realize how good you had it. And you try to recapture that feeling at different jobs and different places, but it just doesn't hit the same way. And there's just so much thematic depth to this movie about addiction and how it ruins lives. This is a movie about self-destruction. It's a movie about self-harm. It's about how, as kids, you're so desperate to grow up, but then when you become an adult, you wish you were a kid again, and the tragedy behind that mindset. It's about how nostalgia can really destroy someone, and it's about the false promises, the false optimism of youth, and you know, this is just the start of our life. It's only going to get better, and you realize it doesn't. It's about wasting your potential. And I just get so much of this movie. And despite all that tragic storytelling, this movie is also about how, yeah, humanity can suck, but it's what it is. Like, it's better to be free and to be a fuck up than to be a slave. And it's about how individuality is important. That no matter how flawed someone is, no matter how tough life is, there is nothing like being alive. There is nothing like being human. And how it's the greatest honor you can be. So these false ideas of perfection are just uninteresting because it's better to all. To all is to human, as Gary says. And there's just something triumphant in that. Like, it's sad, but it's also kind of hopeful at the same time. And I love the ambition of the end of this movie. It could have played it really safe, big action set piece, and you kind of get that. But instead, you get a giant defense of Gary King as a character and maybe how anyone can get better in time. Like, Gary's fate at the end, he still hasn't moved on from his youth, but he's drinking water. He's dealing with it in a healthier way, I guess, technically, but he's still picking fights, and I don't know, there's lots of gray there. So I thought it was an interesting end to the movie. And I just love the originality behind this movie. We always complain, oh, nobody makes original movies anymore. And then they come out and nobody sees them. But this movie is truly one of a kind. And I know it gets compared to From Dusk Till Dawn. But I don't know, this movie just feels so singular. And I do love how it starts off as a comedy and it transitions into a sci-fi movie. That aspect is just done perfectly. And I love how the comedy doesn't ruin the stakes. So, this movie is a masterpiece. this movie is in my top 20 movies of all time. This movie is brilliant, it's heartbreaking, it's incredibly well made, it's incredibly well acted, it has one of my favorite characters ever. I love how cringy and frustrating it can be, I love how thrilling and fun it can be. This movie just gives you everything and it leaves you plenty to chew on afterwards. Just a truly phenomenal work of art. So I'm giving The World's End a 9 out of 10. This movie is something special and I hope it gets the credit it deserves one day. But The World's End, have you seen it? What did you think? Let me know in the comments down below. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. Stay tuned for more videos soon. And Gavin out.